Let's start this one out with a question. How many players do you think this season in the NBA are going to make at least $30 million? Go ahead and make your guess. $30+ million. How many individual players do you think are going to make that this upcoming NBA season? The answer is 44. Almost 50 players are going to be making over $30 million just this season, which made me wonder who are the most overpaid players in the entire league this season. First up is the only new contract in the entire video guy that just signed this offseason, and it is Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks is going to be making $22.6 million this season. That is the 64th highest number in the entire league. And on the surface, that doesn't seem that bad, right? I mean, he's still a very good player, a starter, and 22.6 might seem like a lot, but obviously in the new context of the league, with everybody making a ton of money, the cap continuing to go up, being a top 65 player in the league in terms of how he's being paid isn't that crazy for Dillon Brooks. But my issue with this deal is what it means for Houston in terms of how it's going to impact like the chemistry of their team. If I'm trying to build a group that I want to grow together and learn how to play well together, I don't really want Dillon Brooks involved in that. I understand what he brings defensively. I understand that there's an energy and an effort level that he brings, but he's going to take too many shots away from too many of these young guys, and I didn't understand the contract at the time like most people. And even though on the surface doesn't seem like a ton relative to the rest of the league, I do think he is one of the most overpaid players in the entire league this season. Okay, now we get into the top 50. Jordan Poole is going to be making $27.4 million this season. That is the 50th highest paid player in the entire league. It's insane that that's the 50th highest paid number, but that's just where we are with salaries right now in the NBA. And Jordan Poole is fine. He was helpful at times for Golden State, obviously won a title with them. There's value to what Jordan Poole provides as a scorer, as a playmaker, as a creator. But that value really doesn't help you that much if you are in the situation that Golden State was in, where they didn't really need any more offense. They didn't really need an inefficient shot chucker guy off the bench. And that's what Jordan Poole is. And he got paid as if he was better than that because of some weird situations in Golden State. Not to mention the fact that they didn't want to lose him as a player and lose him as an asset. Now he finds himself in Washington. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Poole averages over 20 a game in Washington, because their guard situation, their perimeter player situation is terrible. But in terms of the actual value that he's providing to your team, there's no way that Jordan Poole is providing almost $30 million worth of value to your team this season. Okay, now we're getting to the big ones. The 20th highest paid player in the league this year. Who do you think that is? Just take a guess. 20th highest paid player in the league. That player is Ben Simmons, who's going to be making $37.8 million this season. Now, a few years ago, all NBA level Ben Simmons, one of the best defenders in the league, Ben Simmons, a really exciting offensive player, Ben Simmons, that guy is absolutely worth this number. That's why he got the max contract in the first place, and there's a lot of value in who Ben Simmons used to be. But it's been a while since we've seen that player, not to mention the fact that even if in some crazy scenario Ben Simmons returns to the guy that we saw 2 or 3 years ago, there's no guarantee that he's going to be healthy and maintain that for any number of games at a time. And I've said this before, last year's version of Ben Simmons, the games that he actually played, in terms of players that played a good amount of minutes, was one of the worst players in the entire league. Like, I'm not exaggerating. In terms of guys that were actually out there playing 25 minutes a game that their team was actually counting on, he was one of the worst players in the league, yet he's being paid this season like a top 20 player. There is still a scenario in which he has a really good year, is finally healthy, moves on fully from the Philadelphia situation. Everything happening in Brooklyn this year will be much less dramatic than it has been over the last few seasons. No KD, no Kyrie, no James Harden. It's just, Mikal Bridges and a ton of wings, and let's figure it out. And maybe Ben Simmons becomes that guy again. It becomes worth this number, but he is 100% one of the most overpaid players in the entire league this season at $37.8 million. And at the very next spot on the list, the 19th highest paid player in the league this season, is a guy that's very familiar with being on these kinds of lists, and it is Ben Simmons' former teammate in Philadelphia, Tobias Harris. And no disrespect to Tobias Harris, he's a good player, and this happens a lot where people start to think that a player is bad, or starts, saying that this player is overrated simply because of a contract that they earned. When he got traded to Philadelphia and they decided to give him this max contract, he was worth a lot of money, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't lose him because they traded assets for him. And Tobias Harris can space the floor. He's a good offensive player. He's improved as a defender over the years. He's just not going to be an all-star caliber player. He's not going to be worth nearly $40 million, but he was worth it to Philadelphia to retain the asset. So this one, in comparison to some of the other players that we've talked about so far, Tobias Harris is legitimately helpful and a very good player to have on your team. It's just people aren't going to like it when you're making as much money money as he is, and unfortunately for him, he is, or I guess pretty fortunate for him, he probably doesn't care that people think that he's overpaid. He's making almost $40 million this year, but he's the 19th highest paid player in the league this season, and certainly one of the most overpaid in the league. I actually totally forgot about this one being on the list when I said earlier that Dylan Brooks was the only new contract on the list. That's just not true, because Fred VanVleet is next up on the list at $40.8 million this season, the 14th highest paid player in the entire league. Now, it's a bit of a shorter contract compared to your typical, huge max deal, but almost $41 million a year for Fred VanVleet, who's a good player. That is a massive number. I mean, if you're 14th in the league, that means that you're being paid as if you're an all-NBA caliber player, one of the best guards in the entire league. And no disrespect to Fred VanVleet, but he's just not one of those guys. He's very good. He can space the floor for you. He can create. I think he's actually really going to help this Houston team as kind of an organizer for them and help out the young guys, find them in their spots. And he was a decent, offensive hub for Toronto last year, an offense that by the numbers was actually better than you might have expected last season. However, when you're a smaller, inefficient guard that isn't going to be averaging like 25 a game or anything, the way that Fred VanVleet is, that's just way too much money. And I can understand why Houston made the deal. I don't even hate the deal for Houston in general, but when you're looking at the list of players that are making a ton of money and you start to scroll and you get in the top 15 and Fred VanVleet's name comes up, it's one of those where like, wait a second, why is he here? 100% one of the most overpaid players in the league this season. Just one spot further down the list, you probably knew that this guy was going to be there. Rudy Gobert, the 13th highest paid player in the league this year, making exactly $41 million for the Minnesota Timberwolves this season. Now, we've talked about Rudy Gobert a lot on the channel over the years about the value that he does or doesn't provide. We talked about when he signed this contract in the first place, how it didn't really make any sense because he was going to continue to get older. Then, of course, he gets traded to Minnesota. And to be clear, Rudy Gobert is still very good. He's still very helpful for your team. It's kind of like the Tobias Harris thing where I'm not going to act like Rudy Gobert is terrible. Yes, there are issues in the postseason from a matchup perspective. If you play, small ball five and you want to space the floor and he can't guard on the perimeter, all that stuff is still true, but he's still a very impactful defensive player, still one of the best rim protectors in the league. However, finding rim protection, finding someone that can roll to the rim and dunk the ball at the basket is not that hard to find. And we talk about this every offseason. A replacement level big is so much cheaper than a replacement level perimeter player or scorer or creator. And so paying a big like Rudy Gobert that, yes, is a great defensive player and yes, is a good finisher at the rim, $41 million is just not a very efficient use of money when you can find someone that does 80% of what Rudy Gobert does for like 40% of the price. And so that is really the issue here. He's one of the highest paid bigs in the entire league. And at 13th, the 13th highest paid player in the entire league, that's just way too much money for Rudy Gobert, in my opinion. Now we move on to like some legitimate stars. I mean, guys that are all NBA caliber players, but still are being paid too much money this season. At ninth, the ninth highest paid player in the league this year is Kawhi Leonard, who's making $45.6 million. Now, to be clear, obviously, Kawhi, when healthy, you go back to 2019 in the postseason, you go back before that, before he got hurt in San Antonio, he was an MVP caliber player in San Antonio before he got hurt. And in 2019, he was arguably the best player in the entire league as Toronto went on to win the title. This has everything to do with a lack of availability and health for Kawhi Leonard. You can be the greatest player on the planet, but if you only play 25, 30, 40 games every year and every other season you're missing an entire season, you're just not providing the level of value that goes along with being one of the 10 highest paid players in the entire league. And the thing that's unfortunate here for the Clippers is they kind of need to decide if they want to continue to pay Kawhi at this number despite a lack of availability from him over the last couple of seasons. And that's a really difficult thing to evaluate because he is certainly worth this number when he's healthy, as he, showed previously when he was healthy in Toronto and for some moments here in LA as well. And we saw flashes last year of the old Kawhi coming back, but you're just never sure that he's going to stay healthy long enough. And so in my opinion, he's absolutely still one of the most overpaid players in the league for this upcoming season. And our last entry on the list might be a bit of a surprising one, but I've been talking about this one for a couple years. The sixth highest paid player in the entire league this season is Bradley Beal at $46.7 million. Now, Bradley Beal is very good. I'm not trying to say that he's bad, but he might not be a top 20 player in the league. He might not be a top 25. You could even honestly make the argument that Bradley Beal is not a top 30 player in the NBA. I'm not trying to say that I'm making that argument in this moment, but if you can realistically have that conversation about a player that is in the top 6 in terms of earnings in an individual season, that's pretty tough if you're the team that's paying him. Now, the team that is paying him, Phoenix, doesn't really care. They want as many stars on their team as possible. They don't really care about the expense of that. And if they end up winning a title, then it will all 100% be worth it. But when you're looking at the individual player compared to how much they're being paid, Bradley Beal's like a fine player. He's an all-star. Maybe he gets close to an all-NBA season on occasion, but He's had a ton of injury issues over the years, hasn't played nearly enough games, and even when he's healthy, there's a lot of guards that are just better at what Bradley Beal does best than Bradley Beal himself, and to me, that makes him one of the most overpaid players in the entire league this season, just like the entirety of this list. Let me know down in the comment section below what players you would have added to this list yourself. This is my list, but let me know down in the comment section who you guys think I missed.